nice to our speaker who's going to be talking about soft power as a basis of African diplomacy, the person of Professor Christopher Isike. He is a professor of African politics and international relations in the Department of Political Science, University of Pretoria, and he's also the director of the African Center for the Study of the United States, University of Pretoria, South Africa. He's also the current president of the African Association of Political Science. Professor Isike conducts research, especially related to African soft power politics, women, peace and conflict studies, women and political representation in Africa. And he's done a lot of work around the UNFPA, the UNICEF, UN Women, and lots more. At this time, I present to us Professor Christopher Isike. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you for introductions. Greetings to my colleague speakers and participants from over 40 countries spread across 6 continents in the world. Much appreciations to the organizers of this very much needed conference of diplomats and protocol practitioners worldwide. My goal here is simple. It is just to tease out how soft power presents an opportunity for Africa to express itself better and stronger in a changing geopolitical world, right? I believe if countries in Africa can leverage their soft power resources more intentionally, it would become the basis for diplomatic practice that yields better results in terms of its national interest. So I shall briefly, by way of outlining what I want to do, say what I mean by soft power, discuss how the changing international system shapes the understanding and use of power, and then make a few comments on the opportunities for African diplomacy through soft power by using the cases of Nigeria and South Africa to make the point. Permit me, I may not be as exciting as Desmond just now. I'm an academic, so I always view things from usually an academic perspective. So forgive me if I tend to be a bit too academic for your liking. I hope you forgive that. But talking about the meaning, soft power is defined essentially as the ability to make others do what one wants them to do without the use of force. In a nutshell, that's what it is. Its major proponent is an American political scientist, Joseph Nye, who defines soft power as the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion or payment, as well as the ability to affect others to obtain the outcomes one wants, through attraction rather than through coercion. Okay. So Nye argued that soft power is essentially premised on the power of attraction or attractive powers, or the ability to set the political agenda and determine the framework of debate in a way that shapes other people's or other countries' preferences. So in essence, it is the power of attraction. That's what soft power is. The power of attraction that leads the country with attractive soft power resources to have influence over the one that is attracted, right? So countries basically mobilize this non-physical, abstract, subjective, and often subtle attribute of power in 3 dimensions, okay? And according to Joseph Nye, they are culture in places where it is attractive to others. They are political values when it lives up to those values at home and abroad, and foreign policies when they are seen as legitimate and having moral authority. So in this sense, culture, refers to values, norms, and practices that give, meaning to a society in forms such as literature, such as arts, music, entertainment, tourism, like the one that Desmond promotes, and media and indigenous products, that is unique to a particular country. Now, generally, countries can use a number of sources to project these forms of soft power, which then become assets that produce such attraction as I was talking about earlier. So soft power is centered on resources such as the culture of a nation, like I said before, its norms and foreign policy, which reflect these values. All right. So these products, cultural products I've said before, it can include movies, the educational system, humanitarian aid assistance, and the bilateral or multilateral relations, as well as public diplomacy. And recently, we can even talk about diaspora diplomacy, as part of the cultural soft power attributes, or if you like, resources of countries, right? So a country is able to become more attractive, persuasive, and influential through how it mobilizes its soft power resources without having to use force or intimidate other states to accept its preferences. Some scholars have argued that others then emulate actively or have to follow as a matter of course, even though it is not, their willing a choice to do so. Now, more recently, there has been increasing evidence of the recognition of the potency that soft power has as an essential component of power, right? And it is already now passing the measurability test, because that's one of the weaknesses of soft power. Countries are also beginning to pay closer attention to the intricacies of culture, of political ideology and diplomacy as a subtle weapon in the changing international relations landscape. And I'll talk about what I mean by the changing international relations landscape shortly. So major powers, for example, major world powers, superpowers, if you like, such as the United States and China, as well as middle powers such as Canada and Australia, do not deny the potency of soft power instruments in building a positive image for themselves. So even though they have hard power in terms of military and economic power, these countries tend to also use soft power to try and project an image that also adds to the admiration and in turn the influence that they parade in the international system. So it enables them to generate greater levels of respect and admiration, and which most of them that are intentional about, conscious of this power and intentional about how they use it maximally, to their advantage. I must add, like I implied before, that soft power has some challenges. For example, like I said before, it is difficult to measure, although we're beginning to see improvements in that regard. And this is because it is often not as tangible as hard power, such as military might or economic strength. Again, too, it is not always enough on its own without some form of hard power. In other words, soft power complements hard power, and the country's ability to combine both powers, both hard and soft power, effectively is referred to as smart power. And this is where I think that many countries of the world should be tending towards, especially those who don't have strong military power, strong economies like we have in Africa. But before I go there, let me talk about what I mean by the changing international system and how that has affected, our understanding of power. And I'll start, this part of my talk with a quote from a renowned French international relations scholar, Bertrand Body, and I'll quote him now. He says, in 1945, the world population amounted to 2.5 billion people. The United Nations counted 51 members. The world environment was ignored. Nowadays, we have moved from an international world to a global world. The world population amounts to more than 7.5 billion people. This he was writing in 2020. The UN is constituted by 193 members. Europe is no longer the battlefield of the world, although this has changed now with what is happening in Ukraine. And then while the main conflicts, international issues, social needs, threats to human security, and demographic pressures are located in the global south. Power is becoming powerless. The US superpower does not win the wars, and even weakness seems currently more efficient than power is. Weakness politics, he calls it, about to be substituted for power politics. So in other words, it's asking a question: is weakness politics, weakness in quote, about to be substituted for power politics? Now, although Badi was questioning why we continue to use the same lens, theoretical lens of real politics or realism to explain international relations in the 21st century, despite its, well, then in 2020, probably becoming irrelevant and inadequate in this regard, but all of this now is beginning to change with what Russia is doing in Ukraine. But he talks about the quote above that I used just now, underscores the reality of a socio-political world increasingly defined by new issues that are constantly emerging that give new meanings to the concept of power, right? These issues, many of which we framed as human security vulnerabilities, including unconventional conflicts such as terrorism and global epidemics such as Ebola and the current COVID-19 we're going through. All of these could be regarded as critical junctions given how they are shaping the tenor of global politics, right? So the end of the Cold War indeed brought new forms of conflict, mostly within states, which presented new security challenges that were, correctly captured by critical security scholars as non-traditional security issues, and which required non-traditional, approaches to understand and to, resolve them. Now, relatedly, these security vulnerabilities were implicated as a potential driver or drivers of the intrastate conflicts, such as insurgencies, guerrilla warfare, and domestic terrorism, like we have in many countries in the global south, that flooded different parts of the world following the end of the Cold War, right? Now, many of these, intrastate conflicts were exported beyond national borders, and it is in this context, really, that we should understand the spread of international terrorism and, of course, the response in terms of the global war on terrorism. Now, these interconnected issues and transnational threats necessarily implied new meanings for the concept of power, and it is and how it is used in international system. So, Badi argues that globalization, for example, in the post-war era, has also resulted in the socialization of the international system, which he refers to as intersocial relations instead of international relations. So, echoing the emergence of new actors and new issues in the post-Cold War world, Badi also underscored their implications for understanding power and its usage in an increasingly intersocial and connected, and if you like, some would say collectivist world over a previous interstate and realist world. So, for example, in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist bombing of targets in the United States by Al-Qaeda in 2001, the US government invoked a two-pronged response in terms of its approach, which it called hard and soft power, acknowledging that hard power, in this sense, force and threat of force, could not or would not suffice to deal with the challenge of terrorism alone. The COVID-19 pandemic, which brought the entire world to a standstill in 2020, can also be understood in this context, given how powerful countries of the world capitulated, to it sometimes in worse fashion than less powerful and poor countries of the global south. So clearly, in the new context of an intersocial world of new actors, new issues that are beyond the control of states, military power and missiles alone do not count for much, okay? And political strategies lose their previous primacy. And again, too, if we look at what is happening in Ukraine, we can see how the resolve of people connecting with people from across different parts of the world is helping to contain a strong military power in the form of Russia. So the point I'm trying to make is that soft power in a changing geostrategic world presents an opportunity, for states that have an abundance of soft power resources, to punch a little bit above their weight. So coming now to opportunities that it presents for African diplomacy. So I'm saying that unlike big and hard and soft power countries, unlike big soft power countries such as the United States, China, and the UK, most African countries do not have hard power capabilities to make them, globally competitive in a realist world driven by economic and military capabilities, right? However, Africa does have an abundance of soft power resources and potentials which it can appropriate to rack up global admiration and influence. So countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Rwanda, Egypt, Kenya, and Ethiopia are good examples of such soft power countries that I'm talking about. And some of the resources, let me mention a few. I'll just take the case of Nigeria and South Africa. So Nigeria's soft power, for instance, is in attributes such as its cultural exports, its film, that's the Nollywood, its music industry, its dress culture, its food and other indigenous products, such as its mega churches. There was a time where the late Pastor T.B. Joshua was attracting a lot of people to Nigeria across from different parts of the world. So also Nigeria's political and economic personalities, people like Olusegun Obasanjo, Fela Kuti, who's late now, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, and the most recent of them, Chimamanda Adichie. All of these are so iconic personalities that attract soft power value and admiration for Nigeria, right? We can also talk about Nigeria's sporting accomplishments, even though our Super Eagles don't do so well these days in soccer. International peacekeeping and mediation role, the delivery of public goods through agencies such as the Technical Aid Corps, Nigeria's Afrocentric foreign policy, and a general policy of good neighborliness, right? So in spite of the political and development challenges that Nigeria faces, it can still harness these soft power resources that I've just mentioned as a basis of a cultural diplomacy that can increase its influence in the international arena if it begins to creatively articulate and mobilize its official and unofficial soft power resources like other regional powers at its own level are doing. And when I say regional power at its own level, I'm talking of countries like Turkey, like Brazil, and even South Africa. In Africa, and this brings me to my South African example, which is that, for South Africa, soft power resources include its media export, political ideals, and constitutionally enshrined values of, the rule of law, the Bill of Rights, its vast array of, iconic personalities like, Nelson Mandela, Winnie Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Thuli Madonsela, which garner its, political goodwill, multinational companies, its prestigious universities, cultural exports, sporting attraction, and its hospitality industry, among others. The OR Tambo Airport, for example, is among the 10 best airports in the world. So all of these characteristics are profoundly important, in shaping a positive international image for South Africa as it attempts to set the agenda for international discourse, by championing a multilateral diplomacy that is rooted in its Ubuntu worldview. Now, the institutionalization of a good number of its soft power capabilities has made South Africa to leverage its soft power potentials and capabilities better than Nigeria has done. And this has made it to move beyond, potential to reality. So let me stop here because of time. But in a nutshell, I am saying that diplomacy in Africa can be woven around the continent's soft power resources, which it has in abundance. It does not have the economic and military capability, to impose its will on the rest of the world, the way we have seen superpowers in Europe and America have done and continue to do. So Africa's best bet is to be more intentional about using its soft power resources as the basis of its diplomatic engagement, in all fronts with the rest of the world. And it can stand a chance of punching above its weight while slowly building towards, developing other power capabilities over time. Let me stop here, and hopefully I will say a bit more during the question and answer time.
Wow, Professor Chris, you've just done a really round analysis in that short time, and I think it's really appreciated. You've done a really good job there in terms of really analyzing soft power. In fact, when I heard the topic at first, and I said, no, this is really important for this conference because we'll need to talk about it and see how that comes in. I'll just pick a few things and ask a few questions following your presentation. I know you've highlighted the opportunities for Africa diplomacy through soft power, which I think is very key. And I'm just going to, push that debate. In terms of intersocial structure of the international systems, is very relevant. Looking at power politics, you've drawn a good analysis in terms of South Africa and Nigeria, how they can actually leverage the opportunities. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, advancing that to the leadership intentions in terms of in Africa, and also looking at the concept of power usage. So the question I have in mind, I'll just draw your attention to one, the soft power global soft power index for 2022. If you look at the last 3 years, 2021, 2020, just before COVID, you find out that I think South Africa just made its way in as one of the emerging countries who made their way into that report. And you have USA as first position, you have UK, you have China, Italy, of course, Russia found themselves out of the index, and you have Australia, New Zealand, UAE, Brazil. And the question in my mind is, if we have agreed to, for example, making reference to the African Continental Free Trade Zone, where we have 54 countries in Africa coming together to sign an agreement, and relating that agreement to soft power analysis, where do you think Africa will be in the contest, in the global soft power contest? Do you think we have a really better chance, apart from South Africa? Do you think other countries will make their way in another 2 years? And if that's possible, what will be the strong element for them to be there?
Well, thank you very much, Patricia, for your question. And that's, the recent soft power index measure results you gave now confirm what I was saying earlier about South Africa, turning its potential to reality ahead of Nigeria, which actually has a bigger soft power pool, than South Africa. And this is one of the challenges that most African countries face. First of all, there's a lack of awareness, consciousness around the concept of soft power and how it can be used, to attract influence, admiration, and thus influence for many African countries. So that's a big challenge, and in many ways helps to answer the question you're asking. So everything, a lot would depend on how these countries are able to, first of all, articulate their soft power resources, and then calibrate them in such a way that they would budget for them and then intentionally use them to attract attention. By the way, the economy is a soft power resource as well, and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which many of the African countries have now signed on to, it can become a useful way of leveraging benefits, economic benefits to themselves. But remember, soft power is about attraction. So the question would be, what would countries like even Nigeria, what kind of export do they have that is attractive, that other countries of the continent would want to key into and invest in, right? So there's music, there's in Nollywood. There's this food culture which has not been well packaged, in such a way that it can become an avenue for, leveraging the opportunities that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement presents. So I guess what I'm saying in essence is that the opportunity to trade amongst themselves and to become economically better, and in so doing know themselves as one continent, and through which they will begin to see similarities rather than differences, does present an opportunity of soft power that other countries can use to showcase their social, cultural exports, right? And sometimes even religious exports and sporting export. But the problem is governance. The problem is governance. Africa has a litany of state systems that do not converge with the interest and will of its citizens. Many Africans are disconnected from the entities that we call states. They are not, these entities are not states in the same way that the United States, you mentioned, the UK, New Zealand, Australia. The states in Africa are not the same in terms of their essence, their purpose, and then the governance notion that accompanies, that purpose. So we need to engage with these state systems. We need to make our states better. They need to go back to their original purpose in terms of why states have created the modern Westphalian state. Once we can get that right, it will then become easy for Africans to trade amongst themselves and for us to use, become aware of our soft power values and begin to even trade, in terms of the attributes that we all have. So in other words, I'm telling you, the potential is there, but the capability to transfer that potential to reality is in the state, and right now it's missing.
Oh, thank you so much. In fact, I think we have to prepare another session for this because it's really interesting. We have very good comments coming through on the feedback, on the chat. Say thank you for the presentations, Professor, and there's a bit of analysis coming through on smart power and hard power and how that adds up to soft power. So I think it's really interesting. I've not been able to pick any question just yet, but quite very good comments coming through. And we just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I'm very interested in soft power, and I want to see how that works back in Africa and within the diplomacy. And I just think that you've done a fabulous job in terms of really explaining the applications and the effects and what will happen in the future if we bring all the qualities together. And I just thank you so much. Ladonna,
Professor, I typed my notes and I have really been looking forward to this. Like I said, I'm writing down my terms. I'm going to be so smart after this. I'm like, maybe I'm motivated to go back for another, some more education, get a PhD maybe. But enough about me. There is a great question here that I think for you, Professor, that says protocol is more dominant and active in developed countries than undeveloped countries, I'm sure, in the world. How can we, as experts, introduce protocol as a subject in our university curriculums?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. It is also because, like I said, it's because our understanding of state and governance in Africa is perverse. Okay, so the state is not seen as an instrument of development. All right, and so it was created actually by the colonialists as an instrument of exploitation. The state facilitated the exploitation of Africa's resources to the developed world, and that purpose necessarily came with a logic of governance that was parasitic and is also exploitative. So the whole idea of using protocols, the protocol is cut across different levels of society, but we are essentially mostly associated with from at the state level. So once it is missing, it is misunderstood, it is perverse at the state level. Things like, apart from protocol, you should also talk about lobbying as courses that people can actually go to the university to do. Our lawmakers don't really make laws. They just go, they take big paychecks and leave and do nothing, right? So what happens is that because there's a lack of understanding of what governance is, there's also a lack of understanding of the role that protocol can play in governance. And this also drills down to even business. You'll find out that multinational corporations have different business ethics and practice in the Western world. And Africa, when they come to Africa, all ethics and laws are jettisoned, and then they just play like as if they're in a jungle. That is because the state permits and allows it. Because there's corruption that enables them to bribe government officials, and they don't follow any kind of protocol. So even at the business level, the point I'm making is that protocol doesn't exist. So if people don't understand its usage, it becomes difficult to offer any value proposition for people like us to go out there and say, let's do it. So I'm going back to my original thesis that until we fix the state, and when I say fix the state, I don't mean that we must go and carve out new states. I'm saying that all we need to do is to sit down and think about how to come together, include the people, the ordinary people, and get everybody represented to ask a basic question: why is this state here? What can it do? And how can we all be a part of it? The minute we can get into some kind of proper social contract, what you will find is people beginning to respond, will begin to do things more properly, and will not need to be begging or preaching to anybody about having protocols as a course of study, because the need will be there. People will have to create it. The market will be there. People will come study it, and it will just grow like any other discipline.
Yeah, let me just add to that question. It's quite interesting. Last few months, I was talking to Professor on how the African Center can actually collaborate with the International Center for Protocol and Diplomacy, just in respect of getting protocol into the university curriculum. And we're taking a lead and a campaign on that to see how this is listed, because it's really important at this point. Even if we face the challenges, it's time for a proper engagement, in a way of opening up opportunities in learning. And I think the universities should be part of this campaign in terms of collaborating. So just to let us know that there's lots of work going on, especially from the center, the International Center for Protocol and Diplomacy, engaging with universities to see that we have protocol enlisted in some of the curriculum. So thank you, Professor, for the time that you've shared. I'm not sure if we have any other questions at this time, but I'm sure just to say thank you to all our speakers at this time.